Okay. Okay. So if you also, after we get through with all of this tonight, if you want to get in touch with me, it's easy enough. My email is saul.gittleman@tufts.edu, where you can call or get the numbers, get the emails either from Jim or from Franklin, and we can continue this conversation anytime you want. Jim, I want to thank both Jim and Franklin for getting this all set up and taking care of this whole thing. It's a conversation we're gonna have about higher education and about the book that I wrote this year. It just came out about a month ago. I'll hold it up, but I don't expect I can send it to you online. Don't buy it if you don't have to. An Accidental Triumph: The Improbable History of American Higher Education. It came out a month ago, and I wrote it because I could not believe how little Americans understood the system of higher education in this country. They didn't seem to like it. They didn't think we were doing anything. And American higher education is unique. There is nothing like it in the world. We've got 5,000 plus colleges and universities in this country that's simply incomparable, and you can't imitate it, you can't replicate it. We've got small colleges, large, tiny, enormous, rural, urban, for-profit, not-for-profit, faith-based colleges. We have thousands of faith-based colleges. We've got 1,000 Bible colleges. They're all accredited by some different organization. And the words higher education don't even appear in the Constitution. You talk about originalism. There's nothing in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence that even mentions the words higher education. So there's no precedent for what the United States has done, what we've accomplished in higher education. We are in a very tough patch right now because the American people have totally lost faith in what we're supposed to be doing at American universities, American colleges. I just want to read you from this article that I held up before. Higher education has become a threat to America. It appeared 4 days ago in the Wall Street Journal. I'll read you two little quotes. Quote, "The biggest threat to our future isn't climate change, China, or the national debt. It's the tyrannical grip that a hopelessly corrupt higher education now has on our national life. If we don't stop it now, it will eventually destroy the most successful society in world history. Worse than anything else combined, climate change, China, with the biggest threat to this country is higher education." And then one more quotation. "Once an indispensable support of our advanced society, academia has become a cancer metastasizing through its vital organs." The thing I wanted to remind you about, it says once an indispensable support of our advanced society. Increasingly, these people are looking for a golden age. They think there was once a time that American higher education was indeed what American higher education be, and then we've gotten away from that golden age. I wrote this book because I wanted to examine the history of American higher education and see what it demonstrates, what it shows about how we evolved as a nation. In higher education, we make enormous numbers of mistakes. We inflict wounds on ourselves that are quite remarkable. The biggest one, I think, right now is Division I athletics, which has become a $4 billion business. College students going through transfer portals, doing everything under the sun. It really is a crazy world that we've created with athletics in this country. We also, though, have scandals. We have faculty who are corrupting, who are cheating on their research. We've got philandering. We've got scandals. You can't get a newspaper without finding at least one article about how American higher education is failing our country. So somehow we have gotten ourselves into a position where the 60 to 70% of the American people think that the biggest single problem in the United States is the failure of higher education. I'm fortunate to have lived as long as I have because I remember far back and the search for a golden age. I'm saying to myself, what golden age were they talking about? When was the American higher education any better than we are now? We dominate the Nobel Prizes. in the University of Shanghai's rankings of research universities in the world, the United States holds 15 of the top 18 positions. The number one research university in the world is Harvard. They've got listed number 3 as MIT, and the 14th one was Penn. Their 3 presidents appeared before a congressional committee a week ago and got blown out of the water. And they represent 3 of the greatest research universities in the country. Every Nobel Prize we won this year had the fingerprint of either Penn, MIT, or Harvard on the winner. So what the country thinks about higher education and what we really are is a disconnect in America. I'm delighted to be able to do this at Concord, because there are very few cities towns in the United States that are as highly educated as the population of Concord. About 60 or 70% of you have advanced degrees. We're in an area of the country between Newton, Lexington, Concord, Winchester, that's next to the Silicon Valley, an extraordinary area of higher education, should understand what schools are all about and what we've done. But we're being accused now of a level of political corruptness, wokeism, and everything under the sun, where while we are the envy of the world, we have a $36 billion trade surplus in higher education since the end of World War II. We have 1,250,000 international students coming to this country now. We'd have 2 million if we let them in, but we don't. We don't let them in, but this is the target. We're the place where the rest of the world wants to come for higher education. And yet in our own country, we have now respect that is disappearing. About 60 to 70% of Americans don't have any use for American higher education. At the same time, the admissions scandals, where they're trying to get their kids into the top prestigious 10 or 20 schools in the country that accept less than 20% of their applicants, just continues. Harvard will have this year something like 50,000 applicants. They'll take 4% of their applications. There are 20 schools that accept less than 20%. Tufts is one of them, Middlebury is another, Harvard, MIT, Yale, the Ivies, and a handful of other schools that you all probably know. They are the select ones. There's another 500 that take 50% or less of their applicants. The rest of them, the other 4,000 plus, take just about everybody who applies. Now, the costs are enormous. One of the great scandals of American higher education, how much we're charging nowadays. Well, that's rapacious capitalism. They will charge whatever the people pay. The people refuse to pay it, they're not going to charge it anymore. And still, we have a community college system that's virtually free. Certainly it is in California. In Massachusetts, we got 15 community colleges. You can get pretty much a scholarship to all of them, do 2 years at a community college, have very little debt, and then go on to a state university for 2 more years, graduate with relatively little debt. You do not have to grow into a multi-million-dollar debt machine to go to college. And you don't have to go to a prestigious college to have a wonderful life and a wonderful existence with an education. We got hooked on prestige, and prestige now has become the mark of what college is all about. And the hunt for a prestigious college and a prestigious spot has led to further scandals. Now, this is really a tale of 2 cities. Concord is one, but I want to take you back to my own childhood, if I may, growing up in another city that was very much different from Concord. I was born in Hoboken, New Jersey. It was a seaport, a river town, a longshoreman's town. It had 2 shipyards, and my father had a candy store, and we lived in the back of the candy store. My parents were European immigrants who came over as teenagers just after World War I, and before the door shut completely with the Reed-Johnson Immigration Act of 1922-24. My mother couldn't read or write English. My father learned rudimentary. My mother never lost her English, her accent, and college was not important. Nobody spoke about college. prestige meant nothing. The only thing prestige meant is if you drove a Plymouth or a Buick or a Ford or a Oldsmobile. What car you had a little prestige, but nobody talked about college in the 1930s and 1940s. Why? Nobody went to college. In the 1930s and 1940s, goodbye, Rob. In the 1930s and 1940s, not many people went to college. Where did I learn about college? My first confrontation with college was with my grandmother, who was in this country for 45 years and learned only two words: color picture. She loved the movies. So 3 times a week, I went to the movies with the other 80 million Americans who went to the movies every week in the 1930s and early 40s. 80 million Americans went to the movies every week. And that's where we were learning our history, and that's where we were learning what America was all about. I learned my Civil War history from Gone with the Wind. And what I learned about college, I learned from a movie I saw with the Marx Brothers called Horse Feathers, in which he played a president of an American college, Quincy Adams Wagstaff with his name. It was Darwin College, and he had to beat another college in the big game. And it was a football game. And President Wagstaff, if you haven't seen Horse Feathers, let me urge you to go online, find it. It's available. It's a cheap movie made 1932. It's constantly being replayed. Often I must have seen it 15 times when I was a kid growing up. And in order to get, he was allowed to hire 2 professional football players. And of course, he hired his 2 brothers, Groucho and Chico, who became the football players. And at the end, they won the big game. Zeppo was his other brother, and he was constantly spending his time with a woman who was called the campus widow. College looked terrific. I was ready to start college when I was 9. I thought, this is great stuff. It was a great image. The other one that showed me what college was all about was a movie I remember seeing over and over in 1940 called Knute Rockne All-American. It starred Pat O'Brien. It was about Coach Knute Rockne. It starred Ronald Reagan. It was about Notre Dame football. And I remember coming home and telling my mother, I want to go to Notre Dame. Every Jewish kid in Hoboken, New Jersey suddenly wanted to go to Notre Dame. That's all we knew about college. That was the total concept of what college was all about. Americans didn't care about college. Very few were going. Less than 4% were attending college. High schools were very poor. There weren't enough students who could pass entrance examinations to colleges. So college was not a big deal in the 1930s. That certainly couldn't have been the golden age for me growing up in what colleges were all about. From that point on, college was of secondary interest to anybody until the time came for me to go to college. My parents knew that I would go for some reason or other. My mother, who couldn't understand my report card, would look at it constantly and say, your brother's doing better. And so I had to do better than my brother. That means I had to go to college, but we didn't know anything about college. None of our neighbors and none of our friends went to any Ivy League colleges. We didn't know anything about it until my baseball coach came home to me, told my parents, Saul will go to Drew University. It's 20 miles away. It's in Madison, New Jersey. He'll love it. He'll have a good time. He'll go with Sydney, a basketball player. The 2 Jewish kids will go and play sports at Drew. And that's what happened. And it transformed my whole life. This tiny Methodist school, it was a seminary that had about 400 undergraduates also. It changed everything about my life. I learned from a bunch of Methodist ministers to read first the Hebrew Bible, then the Christian Bible. I read the complete Greek corpus. I read everything, and they changed everything that I ever thought about. And so the little college in America that you may never have heard of that has an acceptance rate of 70, 80, 90% are transformative, and they don't exist anywhere in the world. The only place you have this experience when you come into an institution expecting to be a doctor and you might leave an Episcopalian priest is in the United States. In the rest of the world, at the age of 11 or 12, you are selected and you're picked out and you're told, you will be a doctor. You will clean toilets. And that decision is made at 11 and 12, and it doesn't generally change. In America, change is constant. And we never know what's going to happen with a kid who goes to college at the age of 17, who's still seeing a pediatrician, and then starts taking courses on subjects that he never dreamed he'd ever take. So the American system is one built on risk, on change, on channels, and uncertainty. We never know what's going to happen in your 4 years in college. In Germany or in France or in Italy, you've been pre-selected and you go to a college-oriented a program, and you spend your life. When you arrive in college after high school, you are ready for graduate school already. That is a very, very different system, and it gives us a sense of our own uniqueness. Now, why Americans seem to know nothing about what our system is all about, that was what really got me prompted to write a book for average Americans, well-educated Americans, but who really didn't fully understand what the evolution of the American education system was all about. And when did it start? You have to go back to the beginning of the country, to the first college, the first institution. And that was 1636, and it was Harvard. And of course, at that time, what were the colonies? It was a Puritan theocracy, intolerant, and totally unaccepting of each other. These were a whole bunch of different Protestant denominations that despised each other. Harvard was for the Congregationalists. The Calvinists did not like the Congregationalist attitude, so they went to try to find a new haven. And so they wound up in Connecticut and created Yale. They were drowning, besides the fact that they were hanging Quakers on the Boston Common, they were also drowning Baptists on the banks of the Charles River in the 17th century. So the Baptists fled to Rhode Island and looked for a new Providence. So they founded a new school from the money given to them by their first donor, a man named Brown, and Brown University became the Baptist school in America. Evangelical Presbyterians in the colonies decided that Christ was going to show up in New Jersey, so they fled and went to New Jersey and founded Princeton. First it was the College of New Jersey, then it became Princeton. So they were a handful of little colleges with one curriculum and one chore: to produce ministers. That's all they were doing. They graduated the 7 or 8 that existed in the 17th and into the early part of the 18th century. There were a handful. They graduated perhaps 100 students. 80 of them became clergymen. The curriculum consisted of Latin, Greek, biblical studies, and a little bit of Hebrew. That was it. That was the entire curriculum. The president of the college was the leading faculty, and he was generally unqualified to do any teaching, but he was the only person who knew Latin or Greek. So he was the president of the university or the college and became the primary teacher. If he could find another minister who knew some Latin and Greek, that also became part of the agenda. That's the way it was for the first 100 years of 150 years of American higher education. Poor teachers, poor students, not learning anything particular, of no use and of little interest to the country. Thomas Jefferson tried to create the first public university in Virginia, University of Virginia, at the beginning of the 19th century, and there he had no religious test. There was not going to be any religious test in Jefferson, who was a deist and didn't belong to any particular religious sect, but their students were rioting so much that the faculty slept with loaded pistols under their pillows. So there was chaos in one end and theology at the other end, but they were irrelevant to where America was going. It was of little interest, of little use to anything that was happening in the country. The next major event, however, occurred in 1803. We were now in the United States. And the same little colleges were there, a handful of little colleges. But now, what happened in 1803? Thomas Jefferson is the president. The great event was the Louisiana Purchase. And suddenly the United States more than doubles its size. It becomes twice the size of the institution of the state country that it had been. And now Christ crosses the Appalachian Mountains, because all of these schools were deeply, deeply committed to faith. They were all faith-bound schools. They were all Christian, and that was the message that he wanted to teach. The denominations would go in slightly different directions, but basically they were faith-based institutions, and that's what the nature of the country was destined to be. So as they crossed into Appalachia, there was this enormous tract of land, and with them came these institutions of higher learning. And they started to grow, thank you. They started to grow like Topsy, by the hundred, first by the dozens, then by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Now, hundreds, thousands of tiny little church-affiliated colleges were started in the early part of the 18th century, 19th century, at the beginning of the Louisiana Territory. Every time 5 settlers got together, a minister followed and started a college. In 1750, there were 1,400 ministers in the United States. By 1810, there were 40,000. And each one of them wanted to create a new little church-affiliated college. You know many of their names, whether it's Allegheny or Beloit or Moravian or Gettysburg or Muhlenberg, or the endless number of colleges that exist out in Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, just an endless number of colleges. As many as were formed, that's how many disappeared, because it could be fire, it could be plague, one little cholera epidemic could wipe you out, disease, Indian attack, because the Native Americans knew nothing about the Louisiana Purchase. They didn't care that all of a sudden thousands and thousands of settlers raced across the Appalachian mountain range and came into their home, into their homeland. And so the Louisiana Territory might have been an American acquisition, but as far as the Native Americans were concerned, these were just another bunch of invaders. And they settled in there, but created an endless number of small institutions. In every settlement, there was a college. Terrible, mediocre, terrible teaching. If you took college seriously in the first half of the 19th century, there was only one place to go, and that was Europe. And so if you wanted a serious college education or university education, you went to Europe, you went to Poland, you went to the Netherlands, you went to Germany, you went to France, you went to England. That's where the educated Americans had gone to get their degrees. Now, these settlements made it. Many of these settlements got finally flourished. We know the history of the Louisiana Territory. After Lewis and Clark did their exploration, settlers came by the Conestoga wagon load, hundreds of thousands of settlers pushing the Native Americans further and further and further westward. Some of the colleges were there to help educate the Native Americans. So we're going to help the heathens. Others came just to create a place for their own denomination. And there are Wesleyans in every state of the West. There are Wesleyans, there are an endless number of Congregationalist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist colleges all through the South and through the West. They're there in enormous numbers, even to this very day. Finally, they needed help. The Latin, the Greek, many of them were quoted as saying, we got lots of diaries that said, what good is Latin or Greek or the Bible doing me? I need help with my farm, or I need help with my little store, or help in my foundry. So they went to their legislators, to their people who represented them in government, and said, get us some practical help. We need vocational help. And so the legislators of the 19th century got together in the Midwest and said, let's find somebody who can carry this message for us. And they found a senator from Vermont named Justin Morrill, who wrote an act called the Morrill Land Grant Act, and said, each state will create a college or university that will help in the development of agriculture, mining, and manufacture, A and M. And we will pay for this by giving each of the states, or each of the territories even, before their states, 30,000 acres of prime farmland that they can harvest or sell. If it's the woods, they can sell all the lumber and make enough money to start and endow a little private agriculture and mining school to help the settlers. That's exactly what happened, but not until the Civil War. And that means the South did not participate. But the Morrill Land Grant Act took and gave each of these states or territories of the former Louisiana Territory, Louisiana Purchase, hundreds of thousands of acres of land, which they mined and sold and profited from. Of course, the Native Americans had no idea what was going on, other than their land was being taken from them. But the great land grant institutions of America were founded on the basis of the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862. And so you've got the Texas A&M, Kansas State, Michigan State, in the University of Indiana. All of those schools were created, and it was a major educational jump for the United States because it let many, many more people have access. If you wanted to teach a little Bible, a little Latin or Greek, that was okay, but they were primarily vocational schools with a new discipline called engineering. So new schools suddenly proliferated and got bigger and bigger and became state colleges and then state universities. And that was the basis of the Land Grant Act. One other characteristic of the land grant institution that was also written into the legislation, they all must learn, every student must learn to defend his country. And so each mandatory was military training. What do we have today as an example of a land grant institution legally having to mandate military training? ROTC. So all the land grant schools must have ROTC. And they all do, including the ones that are quasi-land grant, like Cornell and MIT, both of which are chartered under the Land Grant Act. Now, the Civil War was fought, and the Civil War allegedly was won by the North. We know that the peace was won by the South, because nothing really changed in the next 100 years. On the other hand, fortunes were made. Enormous amounts of money were made by a whole bunch of people named Hopkins and Stanford and Cornell, and just a huge amount of funding suddenly appeared across the United States. Rockefeller, and they all had learned something from looking at Europe. It was the 1860s, the 1870s, and Europe was doing something that was new. And one country particularly was starting to show a certain kind of inventiveness that the American new oligarchs loved. And that was Germany. In 1870, Otto von Bismarck unified Germany, created one German Reich, created one German nation, and almost instantaneously created a German higher education system that was based on what the Germans called Wissenschaft, science for the benefit of business, the nation, the military, and the country as a whole, for health. And Germany leapt ahead of every other nation in the world, really, to create a world of higher education that nobody had ever seen before, based exclusively on research. The German word Wissenschaft means research. There was no undergraduate education, no little kids running around, just highly trained, highly selective young men, mostly, a few women, mostly men who came in and immediately advanced science enormously. Think of the names: Röntgen, Ehrlich, Koch. They solved diseases. They found secrets for vaccines. They saved millions of lives around the world. And in Germany, they created a whole new educational system with a new degree, a research degree called the PhD. Up until then, if you were a master, what could be better? Well, the Germans wanted something else. They wanted research, and that's what they wanted to get. And they finally got it. They got research at a level that nobody had seen before, inventive, creative, for pharmaceuticals, for everything. Bayer aspirin, just enormous, enormous progress made by this one country at the hands of a visionary government official, Otto von Bismarck. The Germans, so when the Nobel Prizes started in 1901, they were already wholly owned German subsidiaries. The Germans swept the field in the Nobel Prizes that began in 1901. Now, American colleges, with these new philanthropists coming in saying, we want that. Hopkins wanted it. Stanford wanted it. University of Chicago wanted it. A little college in Worcester named Clark. It was a research university. These presidents were all educated in Germany, and they knew what the Germans had done, and they wanted to create a research cohort in the United States. In 1900, they created a group of 14 of them called the AAU, the Association of American Universities. Harvard, Princeton, Yale, University of Michigan, University of Chicago, Stanford, a few others came together and said, we're as good as the Germans. But they weren't. They weren't even close to the Germans. The Germans had gone ahead, and so when the Nobel Prize came, the Americans did not compete. They gave the Germans, as one historian said, just a very good laugh. And America was also besieged by its own racism. Once the Civil War was won and the peace was lost after 1876, things went back to always the way they were. The freed slaves might have been freed, but they became serfs in other ways again. A Chinese restriction. The Chinese have been brought in to build the Great Western Railroads, and immediately after that, they were restricted. The constitutions of the states of the West, California, Oregon, Nevada, the territories, they say in their constitution, no white man has to take testimony from a Chinaman. That's the terms they use. Chinamen have no place on juries. They couldn't have to serve on jury. The Constitution in many of these states were just documents that built racism right into it. And that's the way it was. The Civil War kept going, and nothing had changed particularly. And then it was institutionalized by 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, and the American higher education system responded to all of that ingrained attitude toward race. Blacks and whites didn't go to school together. There was a Black Land Grant Act finally in 1891, but the Black institutions got no resources from the federal government and languored and did not flourish in any way at all. And it stayed that way. Then America began getting tired of having too many immigrants. Nothing is new. These are all things that went on. In 1892, at Harvard, a new club was founded. It was called the Anti-Immigration League. And its president and vice president was the future president of Harvard, Abbott Lowell, became the first vice president of the Restrictive Immigration League. And Harvard began developing a culture of keeping immigrants out. Too many immigrants were getting into Harvard, and people were beginning to complain. And finally, when President Lowell became president of Harvard, it created a system where he said, we need a quota. And Harvard was the first college in 1922 that instituted a quota on Jews and Italians, particularly. They were the ones who were busting down the doors because their children had come into this country from the 1880s on and were pouring into this country, and they wanted something that America had that they couldn't get in Europe, and that was a higher education. But the doors were shut to them in 1922. Then came the restrictive immigration law, and America stayed where it was, never could catch the Germans, and didn't catch the Germans. By 1922, when the doors were shut, quotas were instituted at almost all the major institutions in the United States, and the number of Catholics who were limited, the number of Jews who were limited, permeated most of higher education in the country. The Catholic schools were very much more favorable toward the Irish Catholics. Notre Dame was an Irish Catholic school. Fordham was an Irish Catholic school. So the Catholic institutions, which did give access to Catholic students, still didn't let the Italians in any great number. Same with the German Jews, who had not that much affection for the East European Jews. The German Jews could still get into Harvard. They even put German Jews on the admissions committee and created questions that applicants from New York City particularly had to answer. The first question on a new questionnaire at Columbia was, have you ever changed your name? So they were on the outlook for anybody who was trying to fake his way as a Gentile into the Ivy League, or what was considered the select institutions of the time. So America was not going anywhere. That's then where the title of this book comes in, The Accidental Triumph. Then came two accidents. The first accident was the appearance of Adolf Hitler, who became the Chancellor of Germany in 1933, immediately fired all his German faculty members who had any Jewish connection at all. But Einstein had left and wouldn't come back anyway, but about 30 to 35% of the German faculty were immediately let go, were fired from their institution. And astonishingly enough, the only country that opened its doors immediately was Turkey, of all places, because Ataturk wanted to create a higher education system, suddenly had himself with a flood of high-rate faculty members. The Brits were very helpful. They came in and took a lot. America did not want to open its doors. The American faculty in the 1920s and the 1930s was overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly Protestant, overwhelmingly male, and it wanted no part of anybody whose name ended in a vowel or was a woman or were different. That they didn't want, and there was just not going to be the great excellence that America needed. The doors were shut. A typical American college graduate was somebody that you found in F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, Tom Buchanan, who right away, I think was in the first chapter, his interview said, oh, the country's falling apart. The white race is getting pushed aside. We'll never be able to come back in America. It's a dangerous time. The other colors are taking over the world. He was Yale, 1915, football player, great American, just exactly what most American colleges, or lots of American colleges, were producing in the first 30 years of the 20th century. So there was no way we were going to catch up to the Germans until the accident of Adolf Hitler, who in one generation destroyed the German higher education system. He wiped it out. He politicized it. He created an environment where race was most important. And because Einstein had worked with quantum mechanics and nuclear physics, he said nuclear physics is Jewish physics and it's bad. We can do our own physics with Aryan physics. And Aryan physics turned out to be rocketry, and the Germans damn near won the war with their rockets, but they wouldn't do nuclear, and they couldn't get the bomb because the people who got the bomb came where? To the United States. If you haven't seen the movie Oppenheimer, go see it while you still can. We didn't want to let them in, but we let a few in. We let the right ones in. In 1938, Albert Einstein wrote a letter to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, written by two Hungarians, Johnny von Neumann and Szilard, another physicist, saying that if we don't harness nuclear energy and build this bomb, the Germans are going to get it first. And then who knows what's going to happen. Roosevelt believed it, accepted it, knew he could never get anything through Congress. It was a time like now. There was the Southerners controlled it. They controlled the budgets. You could never do it. So FDR, on his own, spent $4 billion building Los Alamos, Hanford, Washington, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee, without any congressman knowing anything about it. 10 minutes. Okay, I'm moving along. That was the first accident. We got some scientists from Germany who came over. Then Hitler rampaged through all of Europe, and we got other scientists who came over. We got the bomb. We got the head start, and we won the war. We dropped it on the Japanese. The Germans had hit a wall, and they couldn't get the bomb because they sent too many of their scientists to the United States. But we got a taste of German science, and America sort of liked it. First accident that we got the German scientists over here. Hitler killed 50 million people, and we got another start in our higher education system. The second accident, we were winning World War II. The American Legion, not your most liberal organization, knew that after World War I, there had been a bit of a depression. There were too many soldiers coming back. Their jobs had been taken. The American Legion said, let's create a system where maybe a couple 100,000 could go to college and it'll avoid unemployment. And they said 200,000, that's what we want. So they created and supported a bill called the GI Reinvestment Bill. Veterans Reinvestment Bill became known as the GI Bill. And they thought 200,000 soldiers would come. Instead, 5 million American war veterans, 1 million with war brides, came back and started in American colleges after the war was over and caused a revolution. America had never seen anything like the number of people from the backgrounds. They were not white, privileged Anglo-Saxon kids who had gone to Exeter, who had gone to the schools, Groton. They went everywhere, came and were hungry for an education. The universities had gotten hooked on government dollars and let them in, reluctantly let them in. But over half the kids on the college campus in 1946 were war veterans. And they were not kids. They were adults. They had fought. They weren't going to take kindly to any discrimination. And they pushed their way in, brought their wives with them, their war brides, and American higher education changed forever. The funny thing that happened at the same time, another accident, which I included in the book, but I didn't make it one, a separate accident, was the Fulbright Act. Senator Fulbright, a racist. He wasn't a racist, but he was a Southern segregationist. The only way he could get elected was to sign all those Southern bills that had to be discriminatory. He said, had an idea. He said, why don't we sell to these European countries now that the war is over, all the war material over there and let them pay for it in their own currency, zloty, krona, marks, lira, anything they want, because they don't have any dollars. He did it. Hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of money in funny currency came back to the United States. Fulbright said, let's parcel it out to American students who have a bachelor's degree and give them their first year of graduate study. It produced a generation of faculty that was unbelievable. Never seen anything like it. And that was the second accident. The GI Bill and Hitler's coming to power and sending over. Those were the two great accidents that gave America its edge after World War II. Now, something else had to change. If it was going to be business as usual, then America was going to continue its racist policies on the college campus, and that wouldn't work. But that's what they wanted. Levittown was built all through the 1950s, said you could not sell your property back to a Negro. Rosie the Riveter was sent back home, got into the kitchen. We don't want you anymore in the factories. It looked like America was going to go back to business as usual. Lynchings had started again. They were lynching black soldiers in their uniforms now in the South. So nothing had changed. But baseball got its nose under the tent with two guys named Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson and changed everything. In 1945, Rickey signed Robinson. I was way ahead of anything that the American people wanted. The players didn't want it. The owners didn't want it. The vote was 15-1 against it, 16 teams, and the only one that voted for it was Rickey. But the new commissioner of baseball, a Southerner who nobody thought was going to vote for it, said, my vote's the only one that counts, and Happy Chandler integrated baseball. The first guy they picked, Jackie Robinson, had to go through hell, but it worked. Baseball was the wedge that opened the United States to Martin Luther King 10 years before Selma, 10 years before anything. Major League Baseball in 1947, when America was in no way ready for racial equality. The Japanese Americans were in detention camps all through most of 1946. They were still locked up. They didn't even let them out. And most of them were American citizens. So events changed rapidly right after the war, and the GI Bill, particularly suddenly we started winning Nobel Prizes, and people were giving acceptance speeches as Americans with heavily accented English. Well, the first generation of American Nobel laureates were Europeans who had become citizens of the United States. Fermi, a whole generation of them. And we raced to the top, and there we were. And in the 1950s, we were on the top. We were already way ahead of the Europeans that couldn't catch up to us anymore. But the American people, for whatever reason, don't want to believe it. They like Rickover himself, Hyman Rickover said that when Sputnik went up in 57, everybody should learn Russian. The Russians know how to educate. We don't know what we're doing. And no matter what country we came up against, the American people believed they were doing it better. Japan was better than we were. Russia was better than we were. The European Union was better than we were. The American people will not accept the fact that we are the envy of the world. And that's why I wrote the book, to try to show them that we are the envy of the world, but our own people don't want to believe it. And this performance of Congresswoman Stepanek before the 3 president women a week ago is an example. They hate academics, they hate intellectuals, and that's simply the way we are. Everybody wants to come to America, the rest of the world, but the Americans don't want to believe it, and they don't want to know it. I think that's it. I think we can now have a conversation and maybe a little bit of a discussion. We got time.
Excellent. Let me
7:48, not bad.
Well done. Well done. I'm just gonna look for the chat window because that has a couple of little questions in it.
Okay.
There we go. So let's see.
Yeah.
Here.
The Army was not. Sadly, where's this?
Yeah, let's start here.
Okay. Hi, Sal. Nice to see you again. It's been a while since Steve and Barbara's New Year's Day party.
Regina.
Regina.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Okay.
No, Regina.
Oh, Regina. All right. Hi, Sal. All right. Sorry. This is a new chat window for me.
Okay, never mind.
All right.
Okay, so then we had a couple of people posting articles.
I grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Yeah, that was Pamela.
Sputnik. We thought this is the end of the world. The Chinese, the Russians are ahead of us, and again, our higher education community has betrayed us.
So when you said that guy wasn't racist, but he was segregationist, well, okay, that's racist.
That's interesting because Fulbright is one of the great tragedies of American history. He was a smart man. He was president of the University of Arkansas at 30. He was an integrationist. He was all the wonderful things you'd expect. He wrote great legislation, and he knew he couldn't get reelected if he came out of the closet. He couldn't get it. He would have had no impact at all. Right. So he stayed there, signed all the wrong bills, and died a miserable, unhappy man. And his reputation. Now they're having a 75th celebration, 100th celebration of the Fulbright Commission. His name has been left off. He's been woke. He's been sanitized. And that's a tragedy.
So
yes, Saul?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I think the comment about Sputnik, didn't that in fact unleash a torrent of money for educations and research to try to catch up with the Russians?
We have been doing that. I mean, what Vannevar Bush did from the NIH and the NSF, that unleashed more money. But we got enough to get where we got to the point in 57 where we were ahead. We just were behind in rocketry. The Russians, they got the rockets. They knew how to do it. They had Werner von Braun. They had Germans. They got the Germans that we didn't get. And so they did it. It took us only 3 or 4 years to catch up, but they did pour more and more and more money in it. Even now, President Trump tried to cut the NIH and NSF budget by 4%, 7%, and the joint parties increased it by 4%. He could not cut their budget. So that we still have a commitment to research, and we still have, as I said, the greatest research establishment in the world. Whether we can kill it, I'm waiting to see. But there was something else there about
All right, so there's one.
Yeah, sadly, black men were not allowed in combat units. We're not able to get GI Bills and all. Absolutely true. Black men, it was a segregated army. I mean, Jackie Robinson was court-martialed because he refused to go to the back of the bus in Fort Hood, Texas, told by a sergeant bus driver, hey, boy, go to the back of the bus. He was a lieutenant. And I mean, what these people had to put up with, you had no idea. We all would have gone. Bankers, for sure. They were not, and the war was fought segregated. Truman integrated the armed services in 48.
All right, here's a question. Here's someone. Terry says, one of your former students from Tufts. Great seeing you again. Why do you think the tide turned towards higher education?
What do you mean, Terry? What do you mean the tide turned towards? What do you mean?
Why the tide turned? I should say against higher education. That's what I mean.
Against.
Yes, against.
It's always been against. But they mocked us. They used to make fun of us. John Belushi, that's the way they liked it. Animal House. But this time now, they think of us as a danger and a hazard, and they refuse to acknowledge that we're the envy of the world, and they could kill us. I mean, what they did to the three presidents the other day, what Stefanik did to them was all staged, prepared. They were going to humiliate because they know this is an anti-intellectual country. We don't like eggheads. We don't mind agriculture and mining. We don't mind A&M schools. That's practical. But all these other people, you remember during the loyalty oaths, the Marxists, they fired them all. The universities got terrified of having communists on the faculty. So we've always been vulnerable, but as long as we produced something, they ignored us. Now they found out how important we are, and they don't like us at all. And we'll see what the next 30 or 40 years is. But I asked myself, which country could push us off the top? And I can't find one. I can't find another nation that could take our place. China is a totalitarian dictatorship. What makes America higher education great is we're ungovernable. It's an anarchy. It's the incompetent administrators leaving the ungovernable faculty. And it got us to the top of the mountain. And that being on the top of the mountain in this phenomenon that is this 6,000 group institution of higher education with every conceivable kind of choice that you could have, I'm glad she picked Tufts. It's a miracle. No other country in the world can replicate it. And they wouldn't dare. They wouldn't think it possible to replicate the variety of schools that we have and the number of schools that we have in this country. Many of them still faith-based. You still could go to school that's only Christian or even Jewish. I mean, we got maybe 300 or 400 Talmud Torah colleges in this country. So it's unique, but it was an accident.
Let's see another question here.
Pamela has raised her hand.
Sorry, go ahead.
Professor, but we're putting these financial barriers in front of our...
Yeah, it's true. It's true. That's capitalism.
Yes, but that's terrible. I mean, the big thing about the GI Bill is it was a wedge towards socialist equality of opportunity.
Right.
Not
a whole generation of new faculty. Right. So now what you got to do is there's still inexpensive pathways to an education. I said the community college system is great.
Yeah, but not everywhere. And if you were trying to make a living while you're trying to get an education, you can't do it because we don't support childcare, families, healthcare.
What else about America that you don't like? All of this is true. I can't, healthcare. We got a disaster area in healthcare. We got families gone bankrupt. We got whole states that have a handful of doctors. I mean, this is a nut farm of a country. But we're here, and there's not much we're going to do about it except try. And we're in a very, very nasty patch. The interesting thing is when you go back to the 1790s, to the times of Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, or Washington, we were just as ungovernable. The Whiskey Rebellion, Shays Rebellion, we had rebellions all over the country. That this country survived as long as it has with the Civil War. And let's see if we can get through another term if we get that unlucky of President Trump.
Don't you think that we're seeing the parallels between the rise of Trump and Hitler are just...
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. He's bad. I don't know if he's as much of a racist, a Nazi, and a monster that Adolf Hitler proved to be.
Racism isn't the problem. The problem is corruption and totalitarianism, fascism. Yeah. He's not a racist. He's an us versus them.
He might be a psychopath. I can't tell you that he's not, but he's going to get whatever you say about him, there are going to be 62 million Americans that are going to vote for him. And that's something I can't do a damn thing about.
Well, they're also voting against the other opportunities.
Exactly.
Because neither party will allow a real populist like FDR was to ever get elected because they let them win the nomination.
Hey, look what we got. The choices that we have are the choices that we're given. So we are very imperfect.
So here's a question.
How did the introduction of the IQ SAT by Princeton, designed to attract the Midwestern WASP male dominated by Jewish immigrants, figure in the time frame U.S. College of Math? Very important. They started in the time 1910s, 1920, the Sanford tests, the IQ tests, and Princeton had very, very big people with PhDs from Hopkins who had created all sorts of tests based on race, IQ tests that correlated with race. It's in the book, and then a lot of other better books than mine that have a lot. Dan Okren's book called The Closed Gate has a lot of good stuff in it about the Princeton statisticians in the 1910s and 20s and 30s who supported all the mental testing that was done. A lot of mental testing done at American colleges and universities. IQ started with Terman at Stanford, where the Stanford Binet tests were. But all those IQ tests started out at other places to show that the white American Anglo-Saxon was the highest form of education, and the black, and they had charts that were published in textbooks. I mean, sterilization of the mentally retarded. What was the one famous case? Virginia, I can't remember her name. Buck versus Bell, where the woman was called profligate and had nothing but babies. Turns out she was molested by her uncle, raped a bunch of times. She had a high IQ, but she was sterilized anyway. We sterilized 70, 80,000 Americans in the 1930s and 20s alone. So we're a flawed country, but we got to do what we can do. And higher education has to see if it can keep going in this remarkable run that we've had since the end of World War II. Other questions? Is there anything else?
I have a question.
Shoot.
You mentioned the German education system. Germany has the Abitur, and then they have free university education, similar to Japan and China have a national exam. Do you think that would work in this country?
Nope. Nothing like that. Nothing that has anything that has the magic N word, national. The war was fought states versus federal government. Hamilton got shot by Aaron Burr because he believed in a big federal phenomenon. And we'll fight wars about states' rights versus federal rights. Kill the,
Trump wants to get rid of states' rights. They're just using it as a talking point to manipulate public opinion.
Stupid people, right?
I bet if we did it free college, that would be all we need. Free public college.
Well, too many of them are private institutions. Public schools, the vast majority of people in this country.
College.
Right, we're going to move on to another couple of questioners here.
Yeah, the big schools, we educate them at the big school, but got college athletics at those same schools.
Okay, so Paul, you have your hand up? Will you unmute?
Yeah.
No,
You're
good, Paul.
Speak up.
I'm trying to unmute. I
yeah, you are unmuted. We hear you.
I am unmuted. Okay. I hear lots of good things about the British educational system, and the fees are correct and people go there. I'm under the impression that it's really a pretty good system. But
the Red Bricks added something to the 2 or 3 great universities. I mean, Oxford, Cambridge, and now University of London. When I said the Americans have 12 out of the top 15, the other 3 are UK. They are great institutions. The Red Bricks are very good. They are like the land grants. There aren't enough of them, and they still have the 11+ exam in England. They still make decisions at a very young age of who's going to go and who's not going to go. And so you got private schools that are public schools, and you choice. There are people that call me from England about trying to get into a prestigious American school. All their kids went to prestigious private schools or public schools. So the English have a slightly different system. It's still elitist. Anything else? If you think of something later on, you want to continue with the conversation, don't hesitate. Yeah, there's a hand.
Yes, I think that there's always a backlash when people talk about funding for higher education. I mean, in the liberal states here, like Massachusetts and California, one thing, but in other places, it's like, oh no, we can't give money for some reason. There's always a pushback against funding higher education.
Yeah. Thank you, Regina. Yeah, I mean that's going to be true. It's like Senator Proxmire. Do you remember the great liberal from Wisconsin, Senator Proxmire? He invented something called the Golden Fleece Award, and every month for about 20 years, he gave out the Golden Fleece Award to what he thought was the most ridiculous NIH or NSF funded research project. Zebrafish. Who the hell cares about zebrafish? Getting medicines out of plants. What are you, crazy? So this was the quintessential wonderful liberal senator, anti-intellectual. He made fun, and his constituency loved him. The Congress loved him. Proxmire was admired by Republicans because of his wonderful Golden Fleece Award, making fun of research projects that he didn't understand. And most of the people, a lot of the people in these states, take a look at some of the research. If it's not agriculture and if it's not manufacture in Idaho, Montana, you're not going to get any state money. It's got to be practical and useful.
We got one question here.
It is still true that only about 25% of adult population has a college degree. Colleges are only going to be felt by elitists by many of the population. Yeah, about 22 million Americans go to college now, which is a reasonably high perform. And now there are ads on TV to say there's a paper ceiling. That means the paper ceiling ad says you don't have to go to college. They're holding you down because you don't have a diploma. So there are always going to be people that say you don't have to go to college, and not all Americans are going to want to go to college. The liberal arts are almost, I mean, the soft humanities are sort of on their last leg for the moment. They may make a comeback, but the kids, once you go into college, you're going to find something. As I said, you go in to become a doctor, you come out an Episcopalian priest. You don't know what's going to happen in an American college, but it's always going to be, if a quarter of the population goes to college, we got 300 million Americans. I'm not sure how many are eligible. Many more are eligible than go. Some of them don't, and families are still ambitious. Even the ones that are home, what do you call it? Homeschooled. They want their kids to go to college. You can find a Hillsdale. You can find a St. John's. You can find a conservative school. You can find a faith-based school. The College of Worcester, a whole bunch of places. You can find schools with compulsory chapel. You can find a good school that'll fit your values as a family. And I personally don't care where you go to anything, but you're going to get some faculty. You're just going to learn something that you didn't know. I mean, going to this little Methodist school, as I said, changed my life. Anything else? Yeah, well, it'll always be the educated against the uneducated. I mean, this book that the two Princeton economists wrote, Deaths of Despair, it's a little skinny book, came out this year or last year, Deaths of Despair. Which population group in the United States is going like this on death? It's uneducated white males. They're dying at an extraordinary rate. They passed everybody in the charts. Deaths of despair. It's drug addiction, alcoholism, and suicide. We got a lot of problems in this country, and we solve the ones that they can, but the others they're not doing much about. Anything else? Well, how do we do?
One more.
Okay.
Sorry. I know I'm dominating, but I can't resist.
No, you're doing fine.
What about the culture wars?
Oh, see, what happened after there was a narrative. The American narrative was Custer's last stand, from sea to shining sea, God shed his life on thee. That's what we learned from Gone with the Wind, the benevolent, whatever was going on in the country. You know, Custer's last stand was 1876. That was the end of any hope that the Indians got any fair treatment in this country. When Custer was killed, from that on, it was on the way to bury me at Wounded Knee. But nobody heard about Wounded Knee until Dustin Hoffman made a movie out of it in the 1980s or 70s. We had our own narrative. And the narrative that America had was the one that we were the bastion of freedom, the home of the enemy of totalitarianism, equality, one country under God, all this stuff. That was the narrative. And then the American historical narrative that we were taught in school. Then after the war, a new generation of historians came in, and they created, the first book I read about slavery was called That Peculiar Institution. So nobody wrote about slavery. The American historians didn't. George Bancroft, David, what was Frederick Turner's first name? Frederick, I can't remember, but the whole American historical school, the American historians, they bought the narrative of the frontier and that America transformed this wilderness into a nation. That's an historical narrative. That the Indians are on the other side. So what the hell's going on? Now we're making movies about Tulsa and Andrew Jackson. I read the 1945 Pulitzer Prize winning book by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. called The Age of Jackson. The Age of Jackson. There was not one mention of the Cherokee Nation. Nothing about the Trail of Tears. So in 1945, nice guy, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., great liberal. It was not part of the American narrative. It was not something we talked about. All the Indians looked like Anthony Quinn, and the Americans, we won the wars. We saved America. Then the narrative started changing. And like when did he write the Closing of the American Mind? Alan Bloom, 1986. That was the beginning of the confrontation of the narrative. Whose narrative is going to hold out? Which is it? Jill Lepore, another one of my students, wrote a book called These Truths. Who has the evidence? We have a generation of historians now that are better than any generation of historians, American historians we ever had. They're really very good. They know how to deal with archives. They deal with data. They deal with evidence. Evidence is the only thing that counts. And Americans, half the American people don't like the evidence they see. And that's why we got the culture wars.
How do we stop people from using their freedom of speech to manipulate and put tyrants in that will take away our freedom?
724 is very scary news. Let me tell you, you don't know what the truth is. You ask a question that is very much defining what this country is. Get news, as much news as we get, try to find out what exactly is the truth that you're hearing is extremely difficult. The newspapers are mostly now, I personally find the reporters for the Wall Street Journal really pretty good reporters. The editorial page drives you crazy, but my wife can get that. The reporting is exceptionally good. Reporting in the New York Times, I don't trust. The New York Times it's like a New Yorker now. Every article has an angle to it. They described this morning the testimony that the 3 women presidents gave. They used the word in the article, their evasive territory, their evasive testimony. That's a loaded word. That is a reporter using a loaded word, evasive testimony. That's not good reporting. That's not disinterested reporting. That's not detached reporting. And how do you get that done? I don't know. It was the same way in 1790.
That's the book.
That's a despair. Yeah, Deaton and Anne Rice.
And Case.
Anne Case.
Yep.
They're married. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. Angus Deaton. Good book. But truth, where the heck it's a very difficult thing to find what the truth is. In Gaza, in Israel, you just don't know what you get. But you can spot a totalitarian mind when you see it. I'm out of it. I'm really glad. I see a lot of people my own age. I'm happy happier than if I were back in the classroom. Not now. I don't want to be there.
All right.
Okay.
I think we're time to thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for letting me in. Again, I repeat, if you want to talk, I'm around.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Have a wonderful
Thank you very
evening.
much. That was amazing.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, amazing.